I guess I'll
Goggin,
ask.
go for it. Oh, and then Sequoia, you can go next.
So I just wanted to let you know I messaged you yesterday. My wife got really sick yesterday, so I had to take her to the hospital. I had to leave the class halfway. I messaged you on Slack.
Yeah, I saw that. Sorry to hear about sorry to hear that. How's she doing?
She's fine now. She just had really bad migraine, so she was about to fall at work. So I had to go pick her up and take her to the hospital and get some
Gotcha.
done. And we came back home at 3 a.m. It was all that they were worried about something else there being in there. So, but
I have heard from a couple people that they've had migraines recently. I don't know if it's like the combination of the smoke or the pressure changes for all the weather, but I think something's going around because I think 3 or 4 different students had headaches,
yeah,
or migraines. So
the doctor said it's because she has asthma too, so it could lead to having that smoke issue. So she had it for last week, but she was like she's having pain off and on. But yesterday was like she about to fall at work, so the manager was like, "You leave, call somebody so they can take you." So I had to leave halfway.
gotcha. Sequoia, did you have a question?
Yes, so I was doing some like free code camp stuff. So I remember yesterday you saying not to use var. So I just want to recap and say instead of saying var, we say let, right?
Let or const, yes. So we use let when we are making a variable that will change down the road. So you'll notice that we do like a let generated HTML instead of a const generated HTML because we keep on adding to it and updating that variable. But we try to use const whenever we can, and then we'll switch to a let if that data is going to change. And that is just a newer way of declaring variables. It's not to say that using a var is necessarily bad. And there's a good chance that if you're looking at older code, you will see var in there. I think Free Code Camp will eventually switch over to using let and const instead of using var. But wherever you see a var in Free Code Camp, chances are you could replace it with a let and it would do the exact same thing and be more modern code. Very good question. Other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Go for it, Rain.
All right, so I left this question from day one on the JavaScript tic-tac-toe, but when we use the button element, we place that to a div. Why didn't we utilize the columns and the rows to place the buttons? Is it because it's, they're their own element or?
Good question. It's not that they're their own, that buttons are their own elements, but the real reason we didn't need to use the columns there is because buttons by default are inline elements. So inline elements by default will just kind of chain on each other and go all the way across. And so you can think about anything inline as text. If you were going to write text, how would the text flow? Well, all the text that you were putting in would flow left to right until it got to the end, and then it would flow down to the next area. Well, if that is considered an inline element, then what's the other kind of element or the other biggest kind of element? That would be considered a block element. And block elements by default take up 100% width. And so when you use several block elements, because they're taking up 100% width, they're going to push down the page for every block element you use. So divs by default are block elements, which is why we use 3 divs to push them down the page. But then because our buttons were already considered inline elements, they kind of just flowed like text would across the page.
Very good. Thank you.
No problem. Other questions?
I have a question.
Shoot.
So on our TikTok exercise that we did, we took out the part where we added the board is filled. So I put it back in there, and but what I wanted to do So when I click it and the board is filled and I'm on like the last square, it comes up that the board is filled. But I guess I don't know where to put it so that it actually lets me select the box and put the X or in there before saying that the board is filled.
Do you want to share your screen?
Okay. Is it sharing?
It did not come through yet, no.
Wait, hold on. It shows too. Wait, let me do it again. Oh, right, got it. Now you can see it, right?
You're good. Okay, so you put it in, if there's not a random coordinate, say that the board is filled. And then we also want to say, let me request remote. So we want to say, check to see if there is a random empty coordinate. If there isn't one, alert the board is filled. Otherwise, because there is a random coordinate, we can tell the computer to actually make its move and put that O back in there. So in theory, we pick a couple different moves. And I pick that last one and we get our board is filled and then it drops that X in there.
Where would I move it where it would drop the X in first?
You could do that. It's tricky because it's the generate board that needs to run before we do the alert. What I don't know though is where it looks like you might be missing. Oh no, your generate board is here. Is this all in your button clicked? Put the X in, generate the board, and then come down here and alert. So it looks like what is happening is this generate board isn't happening quick enough to put that X in, and it's running this alert before the generate board is even done running. So this is a little hacky, but what you could do is say, hey, wait, if there isn't that random empty coordinate, still do your alert, but wait like 100 milliseconds before you do that to allow this generate board enough time to finish running. So let's see if that works. Now we got our X and board is filled and we're good to go. So the problem is this alert is what is called a blocking function call. It basically says while that alert is on the screen, don't allow any of my other JavaScript to run. Just hold there, wait until the person hits OK, and then I'll finish running all the JavaScript. Well, the problem is our generate board is kind of asynchronous. Asynchronous meaning that that code can run in the background. So while it's doing all of this inner HTML is happening in the background. And this isn't happening and getting done in time before this alert shows up and makes everything pause until you hit the OK button. So by moving it into that timeout and be like, wait, just wait a 1/10 of a second and then show that alert, that's what's going to get your X to show up.
Okay, so the first set of timeout that would run supersedes the second one. Is that how that it's reading?
This is set up to say if there is not a random empty coordinate, wait a 1/10 of a second, then alert board is filled. But if there is a random empty coordinate, come down, run this set timeout instead, wait 1/2 a second, put the O in and generate out the board.
Okay. Okay.
So you want to think about it as an if else both of them are going to run a set timeout. One is going to be a 1/10 of a second delay. One is going to be a 1/2 a second delay. And what they do in each is different, but it's all based around, was there an empty spot that you found, or was there not an empty spot?
Okay, thank you.
Goggin, did I see you had another question?
Oh, no, actually.
Okay. Other questions from anyone? Question could be a project idea. It could be just a concept like, hey, can you show me how to do a for loop again? Or why would we use an array versus an object? Or it doesn't necessarily have to be about any of our project code in particular. It could just be a concept or something that you're like, well, I had this idea. How would we go about doing it? And we can, yep. Sequoia, go for it. Sorry, I'll come to you next, Rain. Sequoia, what's up?
So I just had a question about like how we pick the name of our variables. I know we probably talked about this before, but like let's say so for like my website or something. So let's say that I need like a loop or something for like I need to use a loop. And so dealing with like the buttons that we did, right? So would I say like let or const, and then I pick whatever like I want my variable name to be?
Yep. And then you put your equal and then whatever you want to store in that variable, right? And so oftentimes we can't be dynamic. We can't just pick things out of the blue when we're trying to figure out what goes on the right side of the equal, right? Document is saying go to the HTML, get elements by button or by tag name. That's a very specific thing. The button that we have to put in that parameter in the quotes has to match up with the tag name that we're trying to get. But we could store that in any variable we wanted. We could call that B if you wanted to. We could say const B equals document get elements by tag name buttons. That would drive me crazy if you did that, because I'm like, what is in B, right? And so you want to be descriptive enough that if you came back to this code in a year after never looking at it again, what would you understand what was in that variable without having to go back through and reread that code? So the computer doesn't really care, right, what you name the variable or even how long that variable name is. It's more for you to understand what's in there than for the computer to understand what's in there. The one thing that I will say is best practice is to follow singular or plural. Is there multiple things that we're storing inside that variable, or is it just one single thing that we're storing in there? That's the difference between cars and car, right? Well, why would we use car and cars in a loop? Well, cars is giving us access to everything in the array, but the car is saying, hey, every time I'm looping over this, I'm getting another individual car from the list of all the cars. So I'm going to use a singular car in order to reference just that one thing. So variable naming doesn't really matter as long as you are consistent, but other developers will certainly give you feedback and say, hey, I noticed you wrote this code a couple months ago. I'm now trying to add a new feature to it, and I can't really understand what was in this variable because it wasn't named well. And so that's something that you should think about, and you don't need to go overboard. Developers I've worked with will certainly attest that I've named some variables like a sentence long and that's maybe a little overkill, but that is something to think about.
Thank you.
Just another summary of what you just said. Would you say it's safe to say try to name your variables for what it does or what it holds?
Yeah, Latonia asks, is it safe to say that you name your variable for either what it does or what it holds? That's pretty much all that it boils down to, right? Why did we call it button clicked? Well, because that was the function that was going to run when the button was clicked. Now, that makes total sense to begin with, But what if I add 15 other buttons to my page? What if I add a clear button? What if I add a switch X to O button? What if I add, well, now all of a sudden the button clicked, which was a fine variable name, isn't a good variable name because there are lots of different buttons on the page. So you may want to call that, rename that variable to board button clicked. Or something like that. And there are actually tools in VS Code and other text editors where you can rename the variable and it will go find all the different places that variable is being used and also rename that for you. So you may start with a decently named variable to get started. And then as your code grows, as you add more features, you want to go back and be careful that you don't make another variable name that and the two are now suddenly clashing. So variable naming is something that, again, doesn't matter to the computer as long as you're consistent with it. But when other people are reading your code, yes, it does matter. Rain, I'm going to come to you. And then Eva, I have you on deck.
Okay, just a quick question for Rock on Tech, for people who can't attend, will it be recorded like the WWDC?
That is a great question, and I will ask the organizers afterwards. I don't think it will be, but there is a chance that it is. The biggest sign of that will be whether or not you can access previous, like if you could see the 2022 Rock on Tech. I don't see. This is not the first year. Last year they actually had, or a couple years ago, they had Steve Wozniak, who's founder of Apple with Steve Jobs. I don't know if it will be recorded or not, but I will find out for you and get back to you. There's like a Rock on Tech conference recap. But I don't see any of the speakers. So unfortunately, I don't think it is recorded. But if it is, I will certainly share that link with you guys if you cannot attend.
Thank you.
Eva, what's up?
Hey, so I'm interested in, we're building a website that aims to build a community.
Okay.
So is it feasible to add like video conferencing between members of the community, or are there other features that you can think of that are good community building features? And bear in mind, I'm probably really showing age here because there's probably a million features on social media sites that I would never even dream of using that everybody else is very familiar with. So I could use some guidance.
Yeah, so I think video conferencing is one of those things that you definitely want to leave it. I don't want to say leave it to the pros, but leave it to a third-party tool for that. And so one thing you might want to consider is using something like Google Meet, where you could say, hey, when you're booking your event or you're creating a new community, let's just call it Careers in Code Cohort 5, right? One thing that you could do is make an API call to Google Meet and say, hey, Google Meet, can you generate out a URL for this community? And I'm going to take that URL and I'm going to save it in somewhere in my storage, either my database or my local storage. And I'm going to be able to save that so that when that page loads, I'm able to say, oh, because you're in the Careers in Code page, here is the Meet link that got generated when that community got created. So that is a couple weeks ahead of where we're at, right? Because we haven't quite covered API calls yet. But video conferencing in particular, I think, is one of the tools that you would want to leave to an established provider like Zoom or something like that. What you could be thinking about is some kind of commenting, right? So think about Facebook. What is Facebook really good at? It's really good at being able to make a post, being able to see your friends' posts or people's posts in the community, and then being able to comment on those posts. And so all three of those are things that you could tackle. Eventually, you would want to get the API in and get the database in. But right now, you know enough of how to create a form input, how to make an event for when that event gets, when they hit the enter button, how to make it show up on the page, saving that in local storage, being able to loop over that. Those are all things that you could get started on. And this goes for everyone's capstone, right? If you're thinking about it, we're building beyond a website, we're building a web app. And so what are those interactive elements? That's what you want to build on the UI side, because then it becomes easier to layer in that interactivity, either with vanilla JavaScript or with React, which is our module after the APIs. Was there anything else you were thinking of that I can help guide you on your project?
For me, I was just wondering, like, honest to God, I've been married for a long time, so I've never been on a Tinder or anything. So like, if you connect with someone, is there a way that you interact with them like there and then, or do you just send messages? Is that the more much more popular thing?
We will be building a messaging app that is coming up. We will start that in React, and then we'll layer in full stack so that you can see how those messages go back and forth. That is definitely something that we will be building in. The other things you can think of is like, you know, like I said, can you make a post that the whole community can see? What's the interface around? Like you think about messaging, but it's like, well, who do I want to message? That's a big thing that needs a whole interface page on, right? Can I type in a name and have it autocomplete of who I want to message? You want to think about, all right, well, now that I have that working, what does my inbox look like? Because it's one thing to be able to see the messages going back and forth. It's another to say, oh, 4 people have messaged me. Can I kind of see all of that at once? I would say you definitely don't want to reinvent the wheel there. So go look at Facebook Messenger, or go look at even your email, right? And say, well, how does my email do this? Well, maybe that's the interface that I want to design around that. But then also think about what makes your app unique, right? Okay, if this is a Syracuse-based community group, maybe I think about putting the weather over on one side because it's an outdoor group and it's always raining in Syracuse. So maybe that's a little aspect of the site that I can integrate in, going to make it different from Facebook. Or maybe it's group for hiking, and you want to say, all right, I want to put a chance of a probability that the trail will be muddy kind of thing. That could be a cool little feature to add in. So in the entrepreneurial world, they call that your secret sauce. You know, why would people use your site instead of Facebook groups, or instead of posting something on Craigslist, or instead of sending a group text message, or instead of sending an email, right?
Right.
And so that's where you want to kind of focus in on of what makes your site unique. That's what you want to build your interface around.
How do you do research on that? Like, if you were aimed toward a specific audience, like in my case, it's menopausal women.
Sure.
So women 40 plus, maybe.
Yep.
So 40 to 60, say 60, 65. So how would I go about learning, like, what kind of interfaces those women are most comfortable with, or things like that?
Yeah, the best way to do it is to find them and ask them what they're doing already, right? Because what they may say is, oh, you know, I just haven't found the right Facebook group because I really want to talk to people that are local in my area, and that's why I just haven't joined that group. Right. And so you can say, okay, well, what's stopping you from doing that? Well, I don't really want to make a Facebook account. Okay, would you be comfortable making a user account? Yes, I just don't trust Facebook. Okay, now you know that research to say, all right, that's not a barrier. Or they could come back and they would go, you know, there's so many usernames and passwords and I just forget them. And you could say, oh, well, if you could sign in using just your phone number, would you want to use this app? That could be a way to say, all right, I still need user authentication, but that way they can just get text a 6-digit code and that's how they can sign in, right? So the biggest thing you want to do is talk to users who would use the site and just ask questions around, well, what is it? Some people will say, well, you know what? I don't really have a computer. I just do everything on my phone, and I find Facebook to be too overwhelming. Or they may say, you know what? We actually have a support group that meets once a month, but the hardest thing for us is to find a time that works for everyone. Great. Now you can hone in on that. Now you can say, all right, let me go look at other scheduling tools and see if this is something that I either want to integrate into my platform, or is this something that I want to kind of design and build myself? And that's where the most helpful part is go talk to your end users, because you can make assumptions, but you know what they say about assumptions, they make an ass out of you and me. You know, that is kind of where you want to do, they call it market research or user studies or anything like that. But it doesn't have to be that formal, right? It could just be, hey, I've got this idea. Are you guys using something already? Are you, you know, is it just email that you're using? What are, and this is, I use this term all the time, but think about the pain points, right? What is it that is preventing you from doing this more often? What is something that you've tried and just said, no, this is harder to use than me just doing it on my own? And solving pain points 9 times out of 10 are the most successful projects or tech startups or eventually companies, because it's not just a value add, it is actually saying, look, we're solving a problem for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
Oh, I had a question about, oh, sorry, I lowered my hand. Sorry.
Go for it.
So using different CSS frameworks, is it better to use vanilla CSS or frameworks?
So I am a big fan of CSS frameworks, and the answer to that question is really going to depend on what developer you ask. So we hired a designer and a front-end developer at our company, I guess about a year ago. And they started working on the code base, and I was like, well, you're starting from scratch. What framework are you going to use? And their response was, I'm not going to. I'm like, what? And they were like, well, I use Flex a lot, and I can use CSS Grid, and I'm going to make all of our components from scratch. So why do I need a framework? I'm like, okay, you are a little too close to CSS. Like, you scare me of how much CSS you can write from scratch and make it look gorgeous. And so to this day, at work, we don't use the CSS framework. And they built classes that were reusable. And the basic answer was, well, if we need a complex layout, we can just use Flexbox for that. And if you need 2 columns, I'll just make 2 reusable classes for that. And then everything else is just going to be a reusable component, which is what React kind of brings to the table. With that said, I just made a new website over the weekend. And what was the first thing I did? I installed Bootstrap, because I went to use a container, and of course there wasn't a container built in. And I'm like, all right, I don't want to reinvent the wheel here. So when I start a project, I immediately go for either I either go for Bootstrap or a framework called Material UI, which is very React friendly, and I think better looking components than what you get out of the box with Bootstrap. But not everyone will agree with that. And if you're working on a project that is of a larger size, especially as you get more experience writing CSS, some people will say it's worth it to just build all of those components from scratch from the very beginning. And then because you're the one who wrote it, you know how that code works, and it makes it easier to kind of tweak it to get it to the way that you want it to be. So really depends on who you ask there. I call it CSS wizardry, because there is a very fine line between I know enough CSS to get by and I know CSS so well that I can do anything from scratch. And so if you are feeling like you're getting your way up to that CSS wizardry, you may want to consider not using a framework. But until you get to that point, like I don't consider myself a CSS wizard. I consider myself enough that I can build almost any interface, but it's going to be almost always faster for me to use someone else's CSS code and tweak it than it will be for me to write all of my own CSS from scratch. But not everyone is like that. And there are people who could build an interface faster than I could by not using a framework and just building their own CSS. And at that point, if that is the case, then by all means, don't use a CSS framework. But until you get to that point, I would recommend that.
Thank you.
Natasha had a question in chat, and then I'll come to Palash and Eva. So some common attributes or files when you're starting a new project really depends on the project itself, right? So there are, whenever you think of a web app, you think about, all right, there's got to be probably a logo that shows up at the top of the page. Usually there's a nav bar. Sometimes that nav bar is a sidebar, which is saying, all right, there are multiple pages we have to navigate around here. There's usually what we call a one-to-many relationship in a database of, hey, I'm going to go into, I'm going to be able to click on Toyota and then see all of the different Toyota models on that page. Okay, well, that's going to be, I'm going to have a list of all of my manufacturers, and then I'm going to have some other thing that's going to show you all of those. So think about the blog post, right? Blog post is showing you all the different posts, but then when I click in onto one of them, I'm going to get like a detailed page of all of those things. So that's a very common structure to see. Normally, you're going to have some kind of footer somewhere on your page of a contact button and a copyright that shows up and that kind of stuff. But your wireframe is going to be your best guide there. If you can wireframe out a couple different pages, all of a sudden you can go back in through with a highlighter and say, this is the footer, this goes on every page. This is the sidebar, this goes on every page. Okay, this is the menu, this goes on every page, right? And from there, it becomes a little bit easier to break it down. But that is not a given across all projects. There are certainly times that I will build a website and go, I don't need a sidebar for this. I just have a little nav bar, I have my footer, I have my main page content, I'm good to go. So there's no, a lot of people will call that a boilerplate, to say, hey, whenever I start a project, I'm going to use this boilerplate file structure in order to get started. It's kind of like a multi-page template, so to speak. Oftentimes your boilerplate will have a login page, a sign up page, a forgot password page, some kind of dashboard page of what do I see after I sign in. All of those are things that you can see in common file structures, but again, it really depends. You know, I just made a website over the weekend and did not have a login, did not have a sign up. It was just, here's the information, and that's what I built. If you guys are curious, this website is still very much a work in progress. But the idea here is after you graduate, is there some kind of dev shop that you can come in and work at, where we have clients that bring in business. We hire you guys to work on those projects with a senior developer kind of managing you. And then the goal is over a 6-month period, you gain enough experience that you can go out and get a job at another company or start working on your own, doing your own contract work, that kind of stuff. So you can see that website, I needed a container, right? Because that page is responsive. I didn't want the content to spill all the way across. But then there were other aspects of that little collapse, right? Where you can click on a question and have it expand and then also have it collapse down. That was something where I'm like, it's going to be quicker for me to build that in React than it's going to be for me to find where in the CSS framework that is and understand their code. And so that's something that I just built from scratch. And that happens as well. So you always have in business, it's called the buy versus build mentality. And in open source, oftentimes we aren't actually buying it. We're just using someone else's code. But as developers, that's constantly a question that we have to ask ourselves is this something we want to buy or go find someone else's code? At which point we have the downside of having to learn how to use it. Or is this something that is going to be quicker for us to just build it? And in the case of this site, there were things like the CSS framework where I was like, I'm just going to buy it. I'm just going to take Bootstrap and throw that in. But there were different components like the collapse where I'm like, I want to style this on my own. I don't really want this to look like a Bootstrap component. And because of that, I just went ahead and built it. And yes, Taylor, this is what I was talking about at OpenHack.
That sounds like that comes from like a definitely more advanced coding mindset. Like you're thinking like a full stack developer, sorting through different resources and languages and that sort of thing. I was asking because when I was practicing my JS over the last few days, I would try to like follow along the video, and perhaps I fast forwarded some and like I missed where they added all the links and those things. So I'm trying to use the features and I forgot that I don't have like the source tag or something like that. And I was just wondering, do people start off with certain files? Because usually I throw in like a script.js, an index, a style, Bootstrap, even if I don't need it. It's good to have it there, and then I'll like clean it up and get rid of it later.
Yeah, and that is that boilerplate that a lot of people will make their own, and they'll just make a copy of it every time they're starting a new project. The reason why we don't do it at Careers in Code is kind of for two reasons. One, it's good to get that practice, right? Because you may go into a technical interview and they may say, start from scratch. And you're like, all right, well, I have to get so in that mindset of the script tag and the link rel and linking all the pages together, all of that's important. The other reason why we don't do it is because right when you get comfortable doing it, we change it up and we introduce you to a new tool. So React is going to have a completely different file structure, a completely different way of starting the project and all of that stuff. And once you get into that, we're like, here's Node, go learn Node. Here's SQL, go learn SQL. And then you get to the end of it and you're like, all right, well, now that I've graduated the program, I'm starting a new project. What am I starting? Well, it may not be a full stack project. You may have someone that comes to you and says, I want a website. And you don't need Node and you don't need SQL and you don't even need React for that. You're just back to that intro, those intro days. So you can Google that. You can say, hey, I'm looking for a Bootstrap HTML boilerplate. And there will be lots of people who have open source projects that have that boilerplate provided for you. And there are a lot of developers who will make their own boilerplate after they get enough experience and know, hey, I'm constantly reaching for Bootstrap, so I'm going to pull that in.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Eva, go ahead.
So in a meeting today,
Yep.
I'm on a brand new account, so I wasn't like listening very hard because I didn't know what they were talking about. But at the end, he goes with a hint of disparagement in his voice about a major website from a major fintech website. There's just the code is just very JavaScript heavy. And of course,
how dare he?
But I didn't know what he meant. So I mean, I didn't say anything, but I was like, I have to ask what that meant. I need my text speak translator.
I have to choose my words very carefully here. As someone who has devoted their career to JavaScript, clearly I am a fan of JavaScript. And JavaScript is, you laughing at the pain on my face right now?
I didn't mean to. This would be a good example maybe of stepping on someone's last nerve, apparently.
Oh, it's well, I can see it from, so there is a term called script kiddie, and script kiddie is a very derogatory term that came out from the MySpace days, right? Where someone would be like, oh, that's so cool. When you load your MySpace page, it tells you what the current time is. I want my page to do that. And so what did they do? They found some other JavaScript and they copied it off that site. and they had no idea what a function was, what the document object model was, what syntax was. They just took it and they dumped it into their page and it made it work. And they were like, this is awesome. And then they would go find some other code, and all of a sudden they would have 100 lines of code. And if you're like, so what does this do? They wouldn't be able to tell you, right? They were just like, oh, look at how cool my MySpace page is. Well, all of that code happened to be in JavaScript. And so JavaScript became this thing of, oh, this is an easy language to learn. This is a language that just works in the browser, but you can't do anything really serious with it. Granted, this was early 2000s that we're talking about, right? Oh, JavaScript is just this thing that can make our page interactive, but you can't do anything serious with it. You can't build an application with it. You can't have a database connected to it. JavaScript is just a crappy language that we all have to put up with because all the browsers support it. Well, at a certain point, we got better, right? And there were features in JavaScript that got added, like .filter and .map, and all of a sudden Node.js came out in the late 2000s, and it was like, oh, it turns out that JavaScript, for a couple different reasons, is actually really good at running asynchronous code. And asynchronous code is really important when projects scale, right? When we start talking about tens or hundreds of thousands of users, our code has to be really good at managing that. So when one request comes in, it doesn't prevent another request from running. And so that's why Node.js is really popular. One of the reasons that we teach the full JavaScript stack is because, one, it is the de facto language for anything in the browser, right? There are very few exceptions. There are a couple, but for the most part, if you say, what language do you write code in to run things in the browser, you are going to say HTML, you're going to say CSS, and you're going to say JavaScript. Now, if you said, oh, can you name a backend programming language, you're going to hear Python and Ruby and PHP and now JavaScript, or .NET or C#, or, right, there's so many different backend programming languages. But if you said, what's a front-end programming language? JavaScript, right? That is the answer. And so there is a snooty, oh, I'm a backend developer, I'm better than you, and oh, you're only a front-end developer, you're stuck with writing JavaScript. And so when we say JavaScript heavy, it's kind of a dirty, like, oh, the front-end developers did this, and as full stack developers or as back-end developers, we use better programming languages. And because it's, you know, that could have been done easier or cleaner or better in PHP or Ruby on Rails or Python and Django or PHP and Laravel or some other, sometimes there is oh, you don't really know how to code. All you know how to do is write some JavaScript that's pulling off what you need it to in the browser. JavaScript is also notorious for gathering dust on it of, oh, someone wrote that JavaScript and it's doing what it needs to do, but because no one really likes writing front-end code only, no one's touched it in 10 years, and now that that code is 10 years old, it's dated, right? There are better ways of doing that. You'll also find some people will say, like, oh, it's like right now there's a big disparity between vanilla JavaScript and React or Vue or Angular. If you're in a modern version of Angular or React or Vue, that code was probably written in the past 5-ish years or so. And because of that, it's a little bit more modern. It's a little bit easier to work with. If you're looking at vanilla JavaScript or jQuery JavaScript, that code probably hasn't been updated in a while. It's a little bit older. And because of that, it's a little bit like going in and doing surgery on it of, well, I just want this little part to be different, but this is 10-year-old code. And because of that, it's going to be harder to find or work with. So unfortunately, a lot of people who see, you know, there's a difference between, do you have your pinky up around JavaScript because that code hasn't been edited in 15 years, or do you have your pinky up around JavaScript because you don't know that there's modern JavaScript out there and Node.js is a serious competitor to that? And so if you want to start a fight at Open Hack, you can be like, oh, I'm learning JavaScript and I think that it's better than every other programming language out there. Okay, well, now you're going to start fights because Mike is going to come over and go, JavaScript's okay and it has its time and place, but Ruby is a much better programming language. And Mike will have 10 different reasons why Ruby is a better programming language. And then you'll have someone else come over and go, oh, well, you think JavaScript's the hot shit, but really Next.js or Go is really the more popular language. Google created that on their own, right? That Go is the language that Google uses. And then you'll find someone else in the same company go, we don't use Go. Go isn't developed enough. We write all of our stuff in C++. And someone else will go, well, C++ is 30 years old. Why do you use C++? There is no right answer, right? What there is are better programming languages for different projects. But you also have to understand that oftentimes, depending on the size of the company will say, all we do is write C# code. We pick .NET as our framework. That is written in C#. Everyone we hire is using C#. So you could make the argument of, hey, JavaScript is better, or Ruby on Rails is better, or whatever it is. Great. That is a tough argument to make because now we have 300 other engineers in this company who have invested and are specialized in C#. And so now we not only have to retrain our whole workforce, but we also have to rebuild all of the tools that are using that. And so there are things like microservices and a couple other ways of getting around that. But it really depends on the company. My friend works at Block, basically Square, and everything is team specific. So they use about 10 different programming languages, but whatever team you're on says, hey, the 5 of us or the 10 of us are going to build tools using this language. This is what we're experts in, but we have to design our architecture to make sure that our code can talk to other people's code. And that is a very common thing to see at a company. So it really depends, but I will certainly go to battle over JavaScript and say, how dare you look down on JavaScript? And then I will look at the code and go, oh no, this is really terrible code. Sometimes it's just terrible code. It's not because of the language it was written in.
I had no idea that was such a big question, but your answer was fabulous. I learned so much listening to that. And I love I love having this insight because now I can use that to my advantage sometime.
And it's good insight for everyone, right? Because everyone's learning JavaScript and you may be discriminated against, not because of your sex or your gender or any of that, but because you are a JavaScript developer. Welcome to a whole new level of discrimination that you may face. But yes, it's a very good question and one that I very clearly can rant on, but one that is good for everyone to hear of. There are other languages out there and you may be discriminated based off of what language you are learning. The good news is all of that is transferable. So if you are applying for a job and they use Ruby on Rails, well, guess what? Ruby on Rails has variables and loops and functions, and they may call it something a little different, but all of those concepts are transferable. So never look at a job now if they're saying we need 10 years of Ruby on Rails experience. Okay, maybe you can't translate that. But if they're saying, hey, this is an entry-level position, don't count yourself out for that just because you don't know that language. It is transferable. And the good news is the more experience you get, the easier it is to pick up those other languages or frameworks. Go ahead, and then I'll come to you, Taylor. Go ahead. Yeah. So Tonia's question is, there are legacy programming languages. Are there any kind of halfway modern languages that aren't used quite as much anymore. I think it's important to group that under languages and frameworks, because there are some, like JavaScript is still very obviously used, but you'll notice jQuery isn't part of our curriculum. But we don't teach jQuery anymore because it's more preferred to use React or Vue or Angular than it is to use jQuery itself. Languages wise, PHP for a long time had a reputation for being the JavaScript of the backend world, of kind of being that scrappy, you don't really know what you're doing, it's not really a great programming language, or people who use it are just hacking things together. And then frameworks like Laravel came out, and WordPress uses PHP. And that is something that you will hear of, oh, ew, you're a PHP developer. And it's like, well, yes, I'm a PHP developer that's following best practices and using a framework and all of that stuff. If this is a very opinionated answer, this is a very strong answer. My answer to that will be, is someone willing to pay you to write it? And if they are, it may be worth learning it. If you are in the job market and you're finding job description after job description after job description, or saying, we're looking for a WordPress developer, we're looking for a WordPress developer, maybe it's worth saying, okay, is this worth learning, right? The other thing that I think is very helpful is to say, okay, can I compare this to something? Okay, if I'm learning jQuery, what does jQuery compete against? Oh, it competes against React. Well, I know React and I really like React. Do I really need to learn a whole new way of doing this? That is a good question. And you can also ask your mentor network, right? Ask fellow TAs, ask me, ask Ryan, ask Jesse, ask Nathan. We've been around the block. And, you know, one thing that just came up is National Grid is hiring a bunch of COBOL developers. Well, COBOL is a language that we would all consider dead and died in the 80s or 90s. Well, it turns out what's keeping your lights on is COBOL. And so National Grid came to us and was like, we know it's an old language. We're not asking you to teach people that language. We actually have our own training, and we've partnered with IBM to help provide that training, but we have found bootcamp students, bootcamp graduates are best suited for learning COBOL because they are picking up skills so quickly and learning all these different things that tacking on COBOL and saying, okay, learn this next is a legitimate thing. Now, they're a company who's putting their money where their mouth is and saying, and we will pay you to go learn COBOL. So you will see a lot of languages, a lot of different things, but it's important to kind of compare that and say, okay, if they're asking me to go learn Mongo, I don't really know what Mongo is. Let me go see what Mongo describes themselves as. Oh, they're a database. What did I learn in CIC that was like that? Oh, that's going to be Postgres, that's SQL. Okay, now let me look into this and see how many different job descriptions am I seeing with Mongo in it. What is a good thing that you can do is say, what's the market share, right? What Stack Overflow does a really popular annual survey. So if I just do Stack Overflow annual developer survey, 2023, they did send it out yet, but I don't know if the data is available. But if you go into the technology, you can see they have very pretty graphics here, and they give you a whole breakdown of like all the different popular languages. Notice all three of ours are at the top of the list, I will mention. But this can give you a good idea of like, oh, I heard about this thing called Swift. I wonder how much Swift is used. And you could come in and well, maybe that's a bad example. Is Swift not on the, okay, Swift is on the list at 5%. Now, that's not to say that you can't get a job at 4.91%. Swift is the programming language that is used for all iOS apps. So if you're going to be a mobile developer, you're going to be learning Java, Swift, Objective-C, or using something like React Native. Well, you could do it in JavaScript, but if you're talking about native application development, it's going to be Swift/Objective-C or Java. Those are the, and there are other ways of developing a mobile app, but those are the two like native languages. If you're going to say, oh, I'm like a full-time mobile app developer, those are the languages that you're gonna go into. But all kinds of stuff in here. You can see databases and a whole breakdown of databases, and Mongo's on this list at 28%. So you're like, all right, maybe that is worth learning. What we will be learning is Postgres. Postgres goes head to head with MySQL. They use very similar syntax. Same with SQLite and Microsoft SQL Server. You can see SQL is on all of the names of those. The nice thing about SQL is it stands for standardized query language. It's standardized, meaning that no matter if you're using MySQL, Postgres, SQLite, or Microsoft SQL Server, you can write a query in one, copy and paste that query into another database, and it will return the same result. But as you get down here and you're like, all right, well, CouchDB, it's at 1%. Well, it's big enough that out of 63,000 responses, 0.01, 630 people are using CouchDB. Well, that's not a huge number, but it's enough that it was statistically significant for it to be on the list. So I will drop the link to this in the chat. And I see I'm 15 messages behind there, but all kinds of cool stuff on the cloud platform. Latonia, your favorite is number 5 on the list. Right underneath it. But kind of cool. And then they break it down even further. So you can see among professional developers, AWS is a little bit more popular. Among those learning to code, Heroku is much more popular. So they kind of do some interesting statistics in here to give you frameworks. Hey, look, our top 2 frameworks are on the list. This is actually making me want to say, whenever someone comes to us and go, why do you teach JavaScript? I can actually point them at this list. But this can be a good way to figure out what's worth learning and what isn't. Yeah, we don't like .NET. .NET is Microsoft's full stack framework. It has its time and place, and there are a lot of local employers that use it. TCG was very .NET heavy. I believe they're starting to introduce a little bit more JavaScript into the flow of things. But TCG is .NET, Raymore and Flanagan is .NET, Upstate Medical is .NET, Sidearm Sports is .NET. We got a lot of criticism at the time for saying, well, if all those local employers are using .NET, why aren't you teaching .NET? Because it's Microsoft, and Microsoft until about 5 years ago sucked in developer terms. They have gotten a lot better. They bought GitHub. They support a lot of JavaScript projects now, but the industry is definitely headed towards .NET. It just depends on what company you're at and what they've invested in. Gagan, what's up? Oh, sorry, Palash first and then Gagan.
All right, so keeping all that in mind and these the list of the most needed programming languages, how does it usually look for a beginner developer? Like you start using JavaScript one day and now it's time to learn React, and then you probably move a job or something new is introduced, and then you drop JavaScript or drop React and then move to Angular or something. Similarly with SQL or Postgres, like do you keep dropping languages and start learning new midway, or do you ever get proficient at anything?
Dropping, yeah. Yeah, It depends. So there are some developers that are like, Python's my ride or die. And if I go get another job, I don't want to learn another programming language. Python's popular enough. I like Python. I've become an expert in Python. Screw you and whatever language you're using. I'm not even going to apply unless it's a Python position. Some people take that route, and if there's enough job demand, and that's totally fine. There are other people who will say, you know what, I'm a senior developer. I have gotten to be an expert in Python, and there's this other company, and I really like what they're doing. And right, it's important to look at the position as a whole, because I would much rather be at a company and be miserable with whatever language I was using, but be surrounded by a team that I like and be working on features that I think are impactful, than I would working at a company using my favorite programming language and then being miserable about the features I'm building and the benefits I'm getting and the team that I'm on and all of that kind of stuff. So I would say that if I were in the job market, there are languages that I wouldn't mind switching to. Python, PHP, Ruby on Ruby. All three of those would be, maybe even .NET. I talk a lot of shit about .NET, but it isn't as bad as, but there are things that I would not switch to, like Java. Java has a huge job market demand. Java was my first real programming language. I don't know if you can count programming calculators in math class, because I was bored and wanted Tetris on my calculator. But after that, Java was my first real programming language. And it's just old. It's a behemoth. It is updated. It is secure. A lot of big companies use it. But I don't really want to be spending 8 hours a day writing Java code. And so because of that, there are languages that I would code switch. And when I do code switch, yes, there will be things .map, .filter, .includes. These are all newer functions that are built into JavaScript that I only know because I'm writing JavaScript almost every day. If someone gave me Python code and was like, can you tell me what this code was doing? You could, by the end of the program, you'll probably be able to read almost any syntax and be like, yeah, I've got a good idea. I wouldn't be able to write this, but I can give you a general idea of what this code is supposed to be doing, or this looks like a loop, this looks like a function, this looks like an object, this looks like, whatever it is. And then when you do make that switch, yes, you will fade a little bit. JavaScript is kind of interesting because if you're doing full stack work, you're always going to have to be doing a touch of JavaScript. But when I got hired at the startup 7 years ago, they had all of their code, their backend code was in Python. And so I would have to write some code in the front end and then in JavaScript, and then switch over to Python syntax and write that code in the back end. And that's pretty common to see something used on the front end that's a different syntax than what's used on the back end. But of course, you could get out of this program and say, all right, after everything that I learned, I want to be a designer and I'm not going to write any code. But because I know about how the grid system works and I know what HTML gets structured like, I'm going to be a better designer because I know what that HTML is like. Or you could get to the end of this and be like, I hate the front end, but the back end is so much fun and I can write scripts there and I can do all of this stuff. You could become a full-time back end developer as well. So it really depends on where you're going, and based off of that job title, that may impact what languages you're using.
Gotcha. So keeping all that in mind, like where are we taking JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript right now from here? Like, are we dropping it, or should we keep practicing on the side and move on to React?
Keep practicing, because you're going to use it in the API module, and all of the syntax that you're using is going to be reused either partially in React or on the back end. And so it is still worth practicing the JavaScript, because all of the computer science principles are what you really need practice with. And the syntax is also something that you will benefit from. And so when we get into React, we're going to learn how to migrate a vanilla JavaScript app into a React app, not only for practice for your capstone, We highly encourage you to move your capstone to React, but we don't require it. But the other reason is because oftentimes we have these vanilla JavaScript concepts in our head, but then we want to understand how those concepts are different in React. And so just like I was saying of, hey, I can compare jQuery to React and understand the differences between the two, we're going to take those vanilla JavaScript concepts and say those concepts still exist. The notion of an event is still an event. It's just the way it happens in React is a little different. But that's still, that notion of a user did this thing and I want this code to run, that still is going to exist in React. Okay, we have to store our data somewhere. We do that in the data and we generate the HTML. Well, that's going to happen in React. We're just going to learn how to do that with a concept called state. But that state's still going to use an array. It's still going to use an object. It's still going to need to be updated. There's still going to be some HTML that gets generated for that data, right? All those concepts are there. They're just easier to access. But at the same time, we don't jump right into JavaScript or right into React because those computer science fundamentals are very important.
Understood. I have a few more questions, but I'll let Shay go first.
Okay.
I'll be real quick. So I know you mentioned that a few programming languages use similar syntaxes. Would you find it easier to learn a new programming language that use those similar syntaxes and concepts, or is that mostly dependent on the developer and how well they can grasp it, like grasp that? So,
good question. It's interesting because Java and JavaScript syntax are probably very close. And that's the one language where I'm like, absolutely not, like, do not want to work a job in Java. So yes, there are some syntaxes that are similar. The thing that's more important though is the concepts, right? So you're saying like, okay, a loop is a loop. And if I can look at JavaScript and write a loop, I can then go over to Python and try and do a loop using that syntax, right? It's kind of, I don't like to think about them as different. Let me put it like this. Switching from one language to another language in the same category is more like learning another dialect. So it's kind of like saying, okay, I'm from the Northeast, but in the South, they call it pop. And that is a different word, but soda, pop, okay, I kind of get that. What is different though, is if you say, okay, I'm using this database language, and now I need to go learn another backend programming language. Well, that is truly a different language, right? That is a different, conceptually, a totally different class. And so I like to think of, if I'm going from one language to another language in the same group, it's more like a dialect. And then if I'm going from one category to another category, that is like learning a whole new language, vocab, all of that kind of stuff. So there are languages that are similar, but I wouldn't, similar in syntax, but I wouldn't like say, oh, I'm only going to learn these other languages because I know this one. It's pretty easy to pick up. The other thing is that when you go into a company, 99% of the time, they're not going to tell you, open up a new VS Code window and start going. They're going to say, here's our existing code base that has 10,000 lines of code in it that is already working. We want you to add in this feature. Well, it's going to just take you time to go through that code to figure out where you should add in your lines of code, how the existing one is working. And the company is going to understand that, right? They're not going to just drop you in the deep end and be like, all right, go have fun. I need this feature by tomorrow. They're going to say, all right, well, we need to get you onboarded. We need to get your local dev environment set up. You need to understand where this code is. You kind of start pulling the string and following where that code goes and how things are connected. And all of that is part of it. Yeah, Latoni said, isn't it common that there are patterns? And the answer is definitely, right? Like there are only so many concepts that we need to understand. And once you see that concept in one place, you'll see that concept working in other places as well. So it is pattern recognition. It is picking up on all of that. Yes, that is all part of it.
Yeah, that was also going to be another thing. Is like once you understand a certain concept and you go to learn a new programming language, you learn that one and how the concept is similar and you can apply it to there. Would that make things just easier when you're going to another language in the same category?
Absolutely. Yeah, think about it as how long did it take you to learn your first language? How long did it take you to learn English or whatever your first language is, right? That probably took you a couple years, right? And you weren't even considered fluent in it when you were a 4-year-old, right? You would say that's your primary language, but you were still learning until you got to a certain point. But now you can say, oh, I can go take 2 years of a French course and be fluent in French. Well, why? Because what you're really doing is translating from English to French in your head and then speaking it. The same goes for programming languages, right? You're going to be like, okay, it's an object in JavaScript, but when I'm learning Python, I'm going to be exposed to this thing called a dictionary, and I'm not really going to get it. And then a light bulb moment's going to go off, and I'm going to go, oh, a dictionary is just like an object. So when I would normally reach for an object in my JavaScript code, instead, I'm going to reach for a dictionary in my Python code. That is all part of changing languages.
Yeah, and that makes sense, especially when you mentioned don't get hung up on the terms, but the concepts itself. So that makes complete sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hold on. The microphone.
Hello. No, this is Latonia Matrice. I just wanted to share. So I went through careers in code and I think I was a solid student. I did really well. And then I went to another cohort where I did Python and I was killing it. Like I was mentoring people. I was top of the class. And then I came back and met with Max and I literally forgot the syntax for basic JavaScript. So the point of this story is and I think Natasha just said this, give yourself time with JavaScript. Give it a year and a half of your time, and then go to something else. I was able to get that back so I can work in both of them now. And I color code my screens and do different stuff to like help me so I know what I'm doing. But don't rush to just expand your language base. It really is to your benefit to take your time and have a more solid foundation on it, because if you do go off and you immerse yourself, it's easy for you to start losing that stuff, and you really don't want to be just losing all the skills that time and energy you put in to have those skills for JavaScript. That's all.
Great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of value in saying that it's like, is someone willing to pay you to use that language? Because it's so tempting. I think developers often have the case of shiny, right? Where they see something new and they're like, "Ooh, that's cool. I want that." And that is kind of the difference between a junior developer and a senior developer. Is very rarely will a junior developer be tasked with like, start this project from scratch and use whatever programming language you would like. Well, if you're working for a smaller business, if you're the sole developer on it, they may be leaning on you a little bit more as a contractor to make that decision. But very rarely are you going to be coming into a company and the company say, please architect and plan out this massive 5-year project and then hire everyone. It's like, well, no, that's what a senior developer is for, right? And why can the senior developer do that? Because they have had that shiny, right? Where they've gone out and they've started to learn a whole new framework and gone, Vue isn't really that much better than React. Now that I did that in a little side project, now I know I'm going to just keep using React. Now, there are times that you have to say, there are people who will go ride or die on jQuery and be like, jQuery is the best way to do it. We've done it that way for 25 years. Why would I learn React? Okay, grandpa, get with the times. React is significantly better, to the point where most of the industry has decided, hey, we should probably invest in this and move it over time. So there's a lot to be said there. But you do have to be careful about not falling into the, oh, this is some new thing that I want to go learn. You do have to be careful about that.
And people will try to get you to learn everything because it's good for them when they know it, they think you need to know it, like just resist.
Latonia said that, there will be people who will try and convince you of like, I use React, so you should learn React too. And they get really excited about teaching you on that. And again, I go back to my comment of, well, are they willing to pay, right? Or are they willing to mentor you on that? Are they so convinced that their framework or language or whatever it is so important for you to learn that they're willing to spend an hour a week with you teaching you that and answering questions when you get stuck? If the answer is yes, then great, consider learning it. But it is important to say, all right, is it going to be more helpful for my career to learn this new framework or this new language? Or is it going to be more helpful for me to say, you know what, I'm still not comfortable with what I learned in Careers in Code. Instead of going out and learning that new framework, which may seem like more fun, I'm going to go do another React project and get more experience and push myself over there. Because as a junior developer, I would much rather, from a hiring perspective, see that you were an expert in React than see that you know React and Vue and Angular and jQuery. Right? I would much rather see more experience than spread out experience. It is 7:10. Let's take a break, be back at 7:30, and I will answer any other questions that pop up. And some of them can be theoretical, some of them can be about industry. I think those answers are helpful for everyone. Or if you've got more code related or concept related stuff, that's fine too. This is your AMA, right? You're asking me anything in Reddit's honor of total blackout right now. So keep questions coming. All very good questions so far. Be back at 7:30 and we'll go from there. Welcome back. Who's got another question? Or did 20 minutes of a break make you realize how sick you are of me? Yeah.
So you mentioned that company that has multiple departments that use multiple different languages that all have to be able to communicate with each other.
Yes.
Just play in with having the tags at least be the same so that when the script is running, it's just communicating with the same tags.
So Taylor's question, and then Flash, I'll come to you next, was, yep. So I mentioned my friend who works at Block, and they don't have a company-wide standard. They have a couple languages that they prefer over others, but they kind of leave it up to the team to decide what the best language is for the product that they're working on. However, no one can exist in a vacuum, right? And so there are certain things that have to be agreed upon of, all right, we may not have a different database tool for every team, but some teams may prefer Mongo, some teams may prefer SQL. So we're not going to let you pick any SQL variant that you would like, but you will have a SQL variant or a no SQL variant that you can choose between. And so that is pretty common. The other, what is growing, and this is actually a good question for Nate when he comes back for DevOps Part 2, is microservices. So it used to be that when you were at a company, you would work on what was called a monolithic code base. It's just one giant file, right? And it's all in the same language. It's all in the same framework. And whenever you want to add something new to it, you're just going to add a new file. Well, what has become more popular, and it's funny because now the pendulum's actually swinging back to monolithic, but what became popular at the time was something called microservices. So basically, instead of adding a chunk onto this giant piece, you would make this little microservices piece that could talk to other pieces, but would stand alone on its own. And the way that it usually does that is through, I shouldn't say usually, one way it does that is through APIs. JavaScript object notation, even though it has JavaScript in the name, is actually widely used across all programming languages. When you have data that you are trying to communicate to someone else, oftentimes you do that in JSON because JSON is a standard that can translate and parse. The way it parses it out in one language may be a different data structure than it parses out in another, but that general notion is there of if I've got some data in my front end and I send it to a Python backend or a PHP backend or a Ruby on Rails backend, they all have JSON built into it that can parse it into the native data structure. So oftentimes it's not necessarily chunks of code that can run in other people's chunks of code. It's more, hey, my chunk of code is doing this thing, and then it's making a request or sending that data to this other microservice that is going to process it from there.
Like a train station where all the different tracks are coming in and they're being sent to all the translation and all.
Yeah, it's the analogy Taylor uses a train station, and it's not necessarily a hub and spoke model. There isn't always necessarily that central piece, but the idea is that, hey, I can send data to one of these other microservices, and if I do it using the JSON format, no matter what language that other microservice is using, it understands how to parse that data out into whatever the native structure is. And then it can do that in reverse. It can take whatever the native structure is, parse that back into JSON string, send that over to the other service, and then pull it out from there. There are other ways of getting those to communicate, but in a monolith, you can, because it's one giant one, it's kind of trickle down, right? And it gets to wherever it needs to be. But in microservices, it is very common to have that data flowing around. And sometimes that common data source is the database. So one database will have multiple microservices connecting into it. And now you don't need JSON because you're either updating the database or pulling the data from that one central repository. I'm not going to lie, I broke down and got tikka masala from, what's it called? End of Erie. I ordered it tonight, so I have it ready for pickup. Sorry, there's a conversation going on in chat about dinner. Dosa, thank you. Yeah, well, kind of. It is weird to not, I won't be teaching you guys again for another 3 weeks. So obviously we'll be at Rock on Tech, and we'll see hopefully a lot of you guys there. But then Ryan comes in for 2 weeks and then we're off for a week for 4th of July. So this is my last week for 3 weeks. With all of that said, one-on-ones are still available. Don't feel like I am piecing out and going somewhere tropical. Feel free to schedule one-on-ones. Palash, what's up?
My question is, as junior developers, beginner junior developers, what are the nature of our tasks? Like, does it involve sitting in a lot of meetings, or are you given like some tasks to do and then you sit on your computer and do it? Or does it involve a lot of coordination, communication, emailing between teams, stakeholders? Also, adding on to it would be like, are there like some sort of hybrid roles too, where you know a little bit of code, but you have other experience as well, for example, digital marketing or some sort of management? Who makes more money, and what's the highest amount one of us can expect as junior developers? Just as a motivation, you don't have to judge that if you want.
So that is everyone's favorite answer. It depends, right? That is actually one of the most important questions I think you can ask in an interview. It's important to look at a job interview and realize that an interview is is just about you getting excited to work at the company than it is the company deciding if they want to hire you. And so one question that I ask in almost any interview is, what does a 9 to 5 look like? And what are your regular recurring meetings? I cannot stand working in a company where 4/5 of my day is just sitting in a meeting. And that is such a problem right now that it's becoming like a cultural issue of people saying like, I can't get my work done because you have me in so many meetings. And so I think that that is a big issue, not only in our industry, but in our job culture. And so what hopefully the answer to that question that you get is well, we have some kind of project management system. So what is very common to see is you will work in a what is called a 2-week sprint. And that sprint is just a time for you to say, okay, once a week or once every other week, we're going to meet and we're going to do a sprint retrospective. We're going to talk about what we said we were going to get done. We're going to talk about what actually got done. We're going to talk about what didn't get done. And more importantly, why didn't it get done? Did we underscope it? Did we think that it was going to take less time than it actually did? Did we get held up by another team who didn't get us a response? Did we get held up by someone else on our team who didn't realize they were roadblocking us, right? Then you go into, okay, let's go through all of the tasks that we think that we need to get done in the next 2 weeks as a team and go through and come up with an estimate of how long that's going to take. I won't go too far down into the agile rabbit hole, but there's something called story points. Some teams just use regular time estimates, but a good team will say, hey, I'm not going to just pin that on you as a junior developer and say, how long do you think this is going to take? I'm going to give everyone on the team a chance to understand what actually has to get done in that task. And then we're all going to collaborate together and agree that's a 4-hour task, or that's a 3-day task, or, oh, maybe we don't have enough details on that task to really commit to getting it done this week. And then you, as a team, you use what is called your velocity to determine, hey, are we overcommitting to things and not getting things done? Or are we on track from last sprint of getting the same amount done? Or how are we doing that project management? Oftentimes after that, you will have what is called a daily stand-up meeting. And that stand-up meeting may have your project manager in it. Oftentimes your manager and your project manager won't be the same thing. The project manager is managing 10 to 15 people, making sure that they're staying on track and making sure they've got all the requirements. Your manager is going to be your traditional, hey, I'm going to ask for time off, or I need help with mentorship, or sometimes those are the same roles, sometimes they aren't, just depends on the company. And then you'll have your daily stand-up. And the reason it's called a stand-up is because traditionally they made everyone in person stand up to make sure that you didn't ramble on or hijack the meeting. So the person standing had to get everything they needed to say out quickly, and the pressure of standing kind of accelerated that. Of course, there will be other meetings that pop up outside of that. You may be working with designers on your team who may want to review. A good company will have some kind of code review process. So when you think you are done, you will put in a pull request or a merge request in Git and say, hey, I think this is ready. A senior developer will usually review that on your team and laugh at you and go, oh no, this code is really shitty, and give you feedback of how to correct that. And it's just like turning in an essay, right? Where you get that essay back, and that's not your final grade. You need to improve on that. You need to you need to get better at writing your code. And that's something that I do to this day, right? Just because I'm a senior developer does not mean that I get the ability to go, oh, well, my code's always the best, and so I get to merge that in. No. I still have all of my code reviewed by another senior developer. And hopefully you're at a company culture where that senior developer can go, well, I know you're my boss, but your code is really shitty here. Or did you think through this scenario? Or do you have somewhat, is this a better way of improving it? And so that is all part of what's my 9 to 5 look like, right? How many hours am I spending in meetings? Ideally, you want your ratio to be maybe 1 to 4 of time in meetings versus time actually being able to code. But that is that ratio definitely creeps up as a senior developer, because more time mentoring, more time researching different stacks, making sure that everyone's on the same page, more time directly interfacing with the stakeholders and understanding what the needs are, where the bugs are. All of that is part of it. It is usual to cry in your first week. I worked at side tangent because I have another half of Flash's question to answer there. But I did work at AOL as my first internship out after my first year of college. And this project was handed over to me, and I feel like I felt like I understood what they were asking me to do, but there was no, hey, this is your mentor, or this is who you should go to if you need help, or and so my stand-up every day was like, I'm still working on this thing. And the project manager didn't really push me on that. And you should never, if your stand-up report is the same thing as it was yesterday, that is a major red flag that you should catch, or that your manager should catch and say, okay, what is it specifically that you're working on? Yes, this was the whole project that I gave you, but your stand-up shouldn't just be, I'm still working on that project. Your stand-up should be, well, yesterday I read the documentation and I'm working in this file, and here's what I'm trying to get it to do. And right, you want to be a little bit more in depth. Now, what you don't want to do is tangent, because it's very easy in a stand-up for someone to be like, oh, I worked in that file last week, and did you find out about, and it's like, no, you take that offline. You have that discussion after stand-up. Your stand-up is just your report out, and then whoever you need to talk to, you can go talk to. And this happens for remote teams, this happens for in-person teams, all of that. So anyway, my first week at AOL, they gave me this project. I was like, I'm never going to get it. I'm really not a right fit for this role. I just got this because I just got this job because I knew someone and they recommended me. And I was like, I'm not going to get this. I'm not going to get this. And I was like, all right, I can't keep banging my head against this code and expecting to understand the code. So what I did is I went down to the floor of the team that was actually using the software, not my team that was developing it. And they were like, can we help you? And I was like, do you mind if I just sit behind you and just shadow you using the software? And they were like, no, we didn't even know your key card got you into this area of the company. And I was like, oh, really? And they were like, yeah, the developers made sure that our key cards don't get us into your area upstairs. Like, we're not allowed to go talk to you directly. And I'm like, well, that's a double standard. But they were like, yeah, sure, sure, sit down, watch us use it. And that's when I was like, oh, I had no idea that's what that code was doing. But from the end user perspective, I understood what they wanted added because I understood what they were trying to do. And so I'm feverishly, handwriting all of my notes, and I go upstairs and I'm like, okay, now if I can pull that one screen up and I understand why the user is doing this stuff in the interface, now let me go find that in that code. The code was nowhere near anywhere where the feature was that I needed to add, but I started drawing those parallels. I started understanding the user flow, and because I understood the user flow, I was able to find that code that was doing that. I couldn't quite write it yet. I couldn't quite understand it, but I was getting to the point where I could go, this button here shows up in the code right over here, right? And so about 2 weeks in, I was like, I did it. I found it. I finished it. The feature is done. I was finally feeling more confident about it. And I opened my pull request, and in the that was also, I learned Git at AOL because my college curriculum didn't teach Git. And then I'm like, why do I need to learn Git? And was afraid of Git all summer. And then all of a sudden I realized that Git's actually really important for team collaboration. And then came back and taught a lecture because my professor refused to teach it. Anyway, I submitted that pull request and I'm like, all right, I'm done with this feature in my stand-up report. My manager is like, what do you mean you're done? And I'm like, well, here, this is what you asked me to do. And, you know, I pulled it up and I showed him everything. And he was like, that was supposed to take you all summer. And here I was stressing out, like not being able to get to sleep because I thought I was being so dumb and I just couldn't understand this. And I was just so worried that I couldn't get this thing done. And no one told me, hey, this is an all summer project. Well, after that, he was like, well, I don't have anything else for you. And I was like, oh, well, you know, there are a couple bugs that I noticed and a couple features that I think I could add. And he was like, well, go for it, whatever. Like, hey, you're budgeted for the whole summer, like, go work on that. And a couple weeks later, I got 4 emails from my manager forwarded to me that said, thank you so much for fixing this bug, or this new feature is fantastic. And he came over to me and he was like, how, you've never used this software. How did you even know that that was an issue, or that hadn't even been reported to us? And I was like, oh, well, I finished what I had to get done. So I just went down and talked to users and saw what they were doing. He was like, you did what now? And I'm like, well, that makes sense, right? These people are using your software. I think it's important to hear feedback from them. He was like, well, now we're getting all of these compliments because we couldn't really commit to doing all of that stuff. But because you talked to users and bridged the gap, like, you did an awesome job. And so for the rest of the summer, I wrote documentation on, hey, I was really confused when I started in this role, and here are all of the things that I needed to learn. And that was a huge thing for the next intern or the next person that came into the team, because they learned, you know, they were able to onboard a little bit easier. So whenever you are assigned a task, make sure that you know what the expectations are, because the expectation of, oh, well, however long it takes is how long it takes isn't really a good answer, right? You want to know, hey, in general, how long should this be taking me? Because if I'm losing sleep because I've been working on this for 3 days and this is a 3-month-long project, that's an expectation that should be set, right? And so that is very important when you are given those expectations. You know what they are, and also read into company culture. Every Friday, we would stop working at 1 p.m. and we would take Inner Harbor taxi in Baltimore over to a bar, and we would just drink for 2 hours and then come back and realize that we were all too drunk to write any new code and would clock out, right? That was the AOL company culture, right? There was Beer Club Friday, and that was a cool culture. I was under 21 and did not drink until the very last Friday. And the bartender was like, oh, I would have served you. I don't really care. And I was like, oh, all right, well, that's good to know. But anyway, that's asking about company culture, asking about meetings, all very, very important. That is half of the question. The other half was, what should I expect for salary? And there are a lot of great websites out there. Glassdoor is one of them. Salary, fortunately, is becoming less of a taboo topic, and something that if you're meeting someone, if you're meeting a mentor, don't be afraid to ask them, you know, like, hey, it's totally fine if you're not comfortable answering this, but do you mind telling me how much you made as a junior developer when you got started? There are some job titles that will earn a little bit more than others. Full stack is definitely going to get you a little bit more than front end will. That's not always the case, and it shouldn't always be the case, because there are certainly senior front end developers that could write a front end interface a lot better than I could. And it's because they're experts in that, right? The other it depends. Part of that question is the whole COVID thing, right? Remote work has really changed because of COVID. And so it used to be very salary specific. I'm sorry, location specific. And so if you were in San Francisco, New York, Boston, three of the five major tech hubs, and the most expensive, San Francisco, New York, Boston, are top three. The other two tech hubs are Seattle. Amazon and Microsoft are based, headquartered out of that area. And then anyone want to guess the fifth? It's actually the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. And the reason behind that is, yes, RDU. Is there something called the RTP down there, the Research Triangle Park? And it is University of North Carolina, Duke, and this is bad because I lived in the area for 6 months and I can't remember it. There's a third one. And they make up the triangle of universities. And then right in the center of all of that is something called Research Triangle Park, which is a bunch of office space for tech-oriented companies. For a long time, Cisco was headquartered out of there, a couple other really big names. So anyway, everything used to be very salary oriented. And then a lot of people in New York City during the pandemic were like, well, why am I spending, $4,000 a month in rent for a tiny little 1-bedroom studio when I'm working fully remote? I can do this work from anywhere. And so NC State, thank you. That was the third one. So a lot of tech companies were like, all right, well, you're fully remote, you can go work from anywhere. And then the tech companies were like, wait, why are we still paying you New York City salaries when you're living in middle of Montana or, upstate New York or somewhere like that? And there was a lot of pushback of, well, why am I worth any less money if I'm working out of upstate New York as opposed to New York City? Well, that's a good question. And sometimes the answer is, well, if your team is in person, there is certainly something to be said, and as a junior developer, of being able to pick up your laptop and walk over to your mentor's desk and be like, I need help, right? And of course, we've seen with class, you can share your screen, you can go through all of that, but there is something to be said about being in person, having that office culture, all of that stuff. It's funny, my brother calculated out that he was spending an extra $4,000 a year on food because he was eating breakfast and lunch in the office every day. He lives out in San Francisco, and he was like, I saved so much money going into the office, not counting the fuel and the tolls and all of that. But when he went fully remote, he was like, oh, I lost that benefit. And so there is something cool to be said about working out of an office, getting that experience. But there's also something to be said about the salary. And so salary for remote workers is still balancing out. Companies are still learning how they should pay their remote employees. Some of the more progressive companies are saying, you know what, we're going to not have salary dependent roles, and we're going to just say that every senior developer is going to get $75,000 a year, and if you can't live off $75,000 a year in New York City, you shouldn't be living in New York City. Some companies are saying, well, if we require you to be in office, we will give you a location based pay, but if it is a fully remote position, it doesn't matter where you are, this is what we will pay. And of course, there are always ranges. You as an entry-level developer with 6 months of experience shouldn't be getting paid the same as a junior developer with 3 years of experience who is borderlining on going senior. And so bigger companies will have like an 8-level or 9-level pay scale. and very defined metrics of once you're able to do this, once you are no longer mentoring, or you're making language decisions, or you are able to do all of this on your own, you move up a pay scale. Other companies will just say it's just a junior or senior level developer, and these are the number of years of experience. Unfortunately, Syracuse, if it is a location-specific salary, is definitely at the lower end of those salary ranges. So don't quote me on this, because everything is going to be a little different. As an entry-level developer, you can be looking at $55,000 to $65,000 a year. You may have to work your way up to that a little bit. But if you are cranking out code, using your resources wisely, getting mentorship, you can get into that 55, 65 range. 70 would be the upper end of junior in the Syracuse area. I can tell you that my last years of a junior developer, I was making 75. And then I went up to 100,000 as a senior developer. But that was 100 not only as senior developer, but also hiring, managing, and maintaining a team. So I had 4 other developers working under me. I still had responsibility of, if the code broke, my boss wouldn't go to my developer and say, you broke the code. My boss would come to me and choke my neck, and I would turn around and find whoever's neck I had to choke, and then they would go fix it. 100 for a senior developer in the Syracuse area is tough to find. But with the world of remote work, it is not impossible to find anymore. So making 6 figures about 5 years into your career is not unheard of as a developer, but that would be pushing yourself, almost maintaining boot camp pace, and making sure that you understand that sometimes in order to go up, you can't go up at your company anymore. You need to go interview with another company. And that's why company loyalty is not what it used to be. It's because there used to be a guaranteed career ladder at a company, where if you were working there for a couple years, there would be chances to advance. And that is another issue in our work culture, is oftentimes in order to climb the career ladder, you need to go laterally to another company and be able to climb that way. There's a notion of a career lattice if you are interested in learning a little bit more about your career, and how sometimes you need to change your role slightly in order to be able to climb up. And oftentimes companies will actually hire you back at a higher salary if you go work at another company, work there for a couple of years, and then go back to that original company that was paying you. So that does happen oftentimes. But yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea. Obviously, do your own research. I'm not saying graduating the program, you'll be making 100 grand coming right out of it. But it is very possible to be up at that 6-figure range a couple years into your career.
That sounds really awesome. Thank you. If no one is asking anything, can I ask one more question?
Go for it.
Okay, so I'm looking at it from my current field's perspective, from marketing's perspective. So it's in marketing, usually a generalist kind of like progresses more in the career. Like if you know a little bit of SEO, a little bit of social media and analytics, and a general sense of marketing, you kind of like progress more, you become a manager and then a director and so forth. Like, how does that, what's the equivalent of that in coding or programming? Like, you go junior developer, then senior, then a manager, or like if you know a little bit of everything, you can move up, assemble your own team, something like that?
Yeah, it depends what company you're in. Oftentimes that level of growth won't be on you to push. So one of the things that I really like about a startup is that we got to the point where it was like, oh, we have too much money coming in and not enough people to do the jobs. And so my boss came to me and was like, go hire people. I was like, and fortunately I had experience hiring in college. But I was like, well, and he was like, well, here's your salary range. And I'm like, all right, first things first, I got to make a job description, right? And I posted a job description and we went back and forth on that. And I took the job description to OpenHack and I said, does anyone have feedback on this, right? And because I was the only developer, I got the say in what kind of team I wanted to build. And I said, you know what, I want all full stack developers. That's something that even if they're junior level, I don't want someone to look at a feature that I'm asking them to build and go, that's the database, I don't touch the database. And so I made the decision to hire all full stack. Well, we got to the point where it was like, oh, we need more design work. And everyone that we had hired was more back-end leaning than front-end leaning. And so I'm like, all right, we don't need a junior position here. I need someone where I can say, here are the requirements, and they can not only design a beautiful UI, but then they can start building out that in the code without having to bug us. And then they can go, okay, I'm done with this. This is the database. This is real data. This is interaction. Here you go. And I call them a unicorn because it's very, very hard to find someone who is as equally good at design as they are at coding. And they are someone that's total CSS wizardry level that I've looked for years and really struggled to find someone that was as equally good on both sides. That's not always the case for backend. You can find people who are as equally good at front end as back end. But finding someone that's really good at design and really good at implementing that design is really cool. Is very rare. The JavaScript, yes, there will always be someone leans one way or the other. I lean more towards back end than I do towards front end, even though I'm using JavaScript in both of them. But yes, you will find people enjoy working in one more than the other. And when someone answers my interview question of, well, which do you think you're better at? They'll be like, oh, I'm equally good at both. And I'm like, bullshit, which one do you like doing more, right? And oftentimes that's when they're like, well, I guess I would prefer to do this, more than the other. So it does really depend on the company. There are front-end developers that work at Google that make $600,000 a year. That did not stop them from pulling in over $500,000 annually because they didn't know backend or they didn't know full stack. But these are people with 10 years of experience that you could throw any front-end task at them or any design task at them, and they would be experts on that, right? And obviously those jobs are much harder to get. So it does depend on it does depend on the company. I can't say become a full stack developer and you'll never hit the top of the career ladder, right? Like you may find Sidearm Sports is a good local example. They start people off only in front end, and you can only get a full stack role if you're a senior there. And this may have changed. I haven't talked to them in a couple of years, but when we did talk to them, they were like, well, we take all of our junior developers and we put them in front end. And after they get a year or two of front end experience, if they are doing front end very well and continuing to learn full stack, at that point, you're not entry level anymore and we'll consider you for a full stack role. But you can't come in and be like, I'm a full stack developer, junior level, I want to start on full stack. They redirect you to front end first, have you get your feet wet there, and then we'll let you transition over. So it does really depend on the company, and it also depends on what you're interested in doing, right? You can make 6 figures as a project manager. You won't be writing a line of code, but you'll be managing a whole team of developers that are coding so that when a problem comes up, you'll understand the problem and know what the right questions are to ask. Project manager is, I hate that job title. While it's an industry standard, you're not really managing the people, you're managing the project. And manager is a title that goes to a lot of people's heads of, oh, I'm in charge of you. And project manager is sometimes not in charge of the people, they're only in charge of the project the people are working on. Let me see. I can't share all of the code that I work on at work, but let me see if I can find something. There are still things that I find. Some CSS where I'm like, how in God's name could you come up with this? Did I answer your question, Plush? Cool. So SAS is a, yeah, I can share this. Okay, so this is our login screen, and it doesn't look like much, but there are little aspects of it of like you can hover over things and you get a little effect, or if you click in, you notice the field changes backgrounds. There are also things where if I like try and sign in and hit submit, we get an error message. And the error message you'll notice is the fonts are the same. You'll notice the spacing between this and this is the same spacing between this and this. Part of that is good design, but the other part of it is this is the CSS that got written. So you'll see that we don't just say the background color is this specific hex color. We use this light gray elsewhere in our code. And so part of this is SAS, of being able to nest our CSS together that you can't do with regular CSS, but we'll be unlocking SAS as we get into React code. SAS becomes a lot easier to use. You'll notice this is SCSS, SCSS, and SASS are the same variant. They use slightly different syntax, but they accomplish the same thing, and they're the same framework. So yes, we will learn to get sassy with our CSS. So you'll notice that what I would do if I was just writing CSS is I would be like, all right, this is hex, code, whatever, and I would grab some random gray. But what our CSS expert said was, I'm going to come up with 10 different colors. And these are all the different colors that we're going to use in the interface. And if you need that color for anything else, I don't need to go, oh, what's the yellow color that we use, or what's the blue color we use? I can just go in and use that $ syntax and reuse that color. Well, you'll notice that there's a lot of nesting in here because this logo, we probably use logos somewhere else on our site, and we don't want this styling to apply to logos elsewhere on the site. So this logo is nested inside this login page. So that when we use that logo class somewhere else, it's not going to get applied. It will only get applied if it's in a class called login inner that is inside a class called login. There are other things down here like this hover effect where we use this ampersand selector. That is the parent selector. So that is saying apply this hover to whatever parent it's in. This happens to be in the A tag. Then you will see that there are things in here like spacing standard that I have no freaking clue how that works, because that is using a CSS variable, which I kind of understand, a SAS variable, but then it's pulling in information. I can't even trace this, probably in the variables. Yeah, so there's standard spacing that our designer was like, okay, standard spacing is going to be 30 pixels. And if you need medium spacing, it's 40. And if you need large spacing, it's 50. Now, why don't we just type in 20, 30, 50 every time? Because our CSS wizard knew that there were muggles working on this code that would just drop in numbers willy-nilly. And so they said, no, if you are using margin, you use spacing standard and the margin will just look right for you. There is a really awesome book. It's a really expensive book, and I really hate that it's that expensive because it's just a PDF. But it is by the people who do Tailwind CSS, excuse me, called nope. Maybe I can get to it from this is really gonna bother me. It's the factoring UI. This is it. So this is a book made by the creators who created Tailwind CSS. Tailwind CSS is like Bootstrap, but it is, instead of putting developers first, Tailwind CSS put designers first and made the CSS work around the design principles as opposed to making the components and then being able to change them down the road. So this is, again, a stupidly expensive book, also considering that you just get a PDF, you don't get a hard copy of it. But I actually do have a hard copy of this printed out. So if you guys want to borrow this, you can. This is all of the, but why do you have font sizes be at 12 pixels? And how do you decide that an H1 is 36 pixels and an H2 is 28 pixels? And it goes through all of the design principles of how you lay something out, how to think about margin, why you use 10 pixels of margin here, but only 20 pixels of margin down here. It goes into different font recommendations, how you should think about color. It is a 212-page book of what should be common sense. But when you go through and you learn about those principles, you're like, oh, I could never have articulated that. I couldn't have told you why that interface looks bad, but now I can actually tell you this doesn't make sense because of this concept missing in the book. So this is more of a design book than a CSS book. But I have noticed that a lot of principles that our CSS wizard used that they inherently learned over time were a lot of concepts that were taught in that book. So I think the book is, it's 99 if you get just the book, or 150 bucks if you get all of 150 bucks if you get all of the stuff with it, like the font kit and an icon library and stuff like that. So obviously very expensive. If you guys wanted to use your stipend on that, you could. Or I do have a printed copy of it that I can borrow, that you can borrow. Just shoot me a message and I can become a mini library for you on that. Yes, when you use Tailwind, you would use Sass. It is entirely possible to use Sass without Tailwind. And that code that I was showing you, my work code, that is an example of, we don't use any CSS frameworks. We do use Sass, but we built everything from scratch. Shoot me a Slack message if you want to borrow the book, and I will get a list going for you guys. Tara, what's up?
I just had a quick question about what you were just showing us.
Yeah.
Is the $ in front of the code, is that how it's saved? Like when you create your own CSS styling?
Yeah, so the $ here is specific to Sass syntax that says this is basically a variable, so that when it's looking for spacing large, it knows to go find the spacing large here. So this is kind of the equivalent of saying like const spacing large equals 50. And then in here, being able to just say spacing large and it knowing that. SAS has a slightly different syntax for variables than JavaScript or HTML does. But it is that general idea, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Goggin, what's up?
So like the SAS is like just like another compiler, I guess, for CSS.
Yes. So you actually transpile your SAS down to CSS. So if you want to think about it, React actually does something very similar. So it takes all of the CSS that all the SCSS or SASS, the SAS that you've written, and transpiles that, kind of translating and compiling. That's the mutation word that I'm not making up. I swear it's an industry standard. Transpiling and compiling it down to a similar, more common programming language. And that is exactly what React does. So we'll be writing React code, but once it makes it out into production, once it's in our browser, it's just HTML and CSS. The same thing goes for SAS. It takes the SAS syntax that we use and translates it out to just CSS that the browser can understand.
So with the book, I was, since I don't know, for some reason I wanted to try CSS Tailwind again. And if you buy the whole thing, like if you don't want to reinvent the wheel and you want to just use components that are already built, and I think the book comes with it. I think it's like 200 something.
So the book is kind of interesting because the book isn't for Tailwind. There are other books for Tailwind. The book is very much design principle oriented. And it's actually not very code specific. There are certain things that you got to understand about pixels, and having a baseline knowledge of CSS is helpful. But the book doesn't actually say like, in order to do a good design, this is what you should use in Tailwind. Instead, they just say, this is the design principle. And then if you happen to want to use Tailwind, a lot of those principles are implemented in Tailwind. But that's why I bought the book, was because I wasn't looking for how to use Tailwind. I was looking for something to say, all right, I'm looking at this design and it doesn't look good. Why doesn't it look good? Well, I know how to fix it. It's an issue with padding, or the font's too big, or the colors are too similar, or there's not enough contrast, or all of that stuff. But the reason why I printed the book was I actually wanted a book that I could throw at my developers and go, no, you broke this rule. Go look at page 44. Page 44 does not, it tells you what you did wrong there. And so I wanted to learn those principles. And the book is really, it's mostly pictures, so it's kind of silly that I printed it out, but you read through a lot of it and you can get through it in 45 minutes. It's really not a lot. But a lot of that, what's in there is common sense until you have something as big of a project as a capstone. And then it's like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm applying these design principles through. So I made it through 10 years of my professional career without any design principles, any guidance there. And oftentimes a company will have a designer on your team, or have an entirely separate department for art direction and determining that. So I don't want you guys to feel that as a full stack developer, you have to be master designers. That is certainly not the case. But as I am reaching higher on my career path, that is something where I'm like, well, this isn't stopping me from getting another job, but it is going to make it, it's going to make me better at the job that I can do, because when a designer isn't available or it's too small of a team, I'm going to be able to produce something that looks a little bit better. I say as I make the world's ugliest tic-tac-toe yesterday.
Can I show them the Bulma that I just made a website with, like my
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Because I just wanted to show them that there is more like mobile responsive. So if you want to be
yeah,
mobile,
sure. And Palash had a question around that. When you design mobile first, the general thinking is that it's harder to design it's harder to design for a phone than it is to design for a desktop computer. And it's also harder to take a desktop size design and make it fit on mobile. So the idea is make it all look good on mobile first, and then make it look better on desktop, because that's an easier direction to go than it is to start with desktop and make it look good on mobile.
Yeah, so like this one, I was just reading around and like this is what it's called, and it's really easy to get started with. And I just converted my whole project, like my portfolio, into this, and it's like really cool if you do inspect and then you do like mobile. Like, hold on, did it just break on me?
Refresh. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So this is like all the icons and everything comes together, and like it becomes like an in row, like, you know, so column. So you don't have to like write media queries. That I hate writing media queries because it's always wrong. Something is always wrong in there. But I just wanted to show them, because if they like, you know,
Yeah, this is looking great. And I was a big believer in mobile first design. I've kind of backed away from that a little bit. Palash, I think you asked a really good question about, is it just an indicator of the number of users on mobile versus desktop? Well, our software, we said, you're never going to use this on your phone. This is not something, and if you do use this on your phone, we're going to need a mobile specific version of it to use on your phone, because our interface is so intensive. So we actually, and we'll learn this in class, of when your screen gets to a certain size, we can actually put up an error message that's like, hey, you need a bigger screen to work on this website. Now, for a generic website, obviously that's not a great option. But when you are working on something that is desktop specific, it can be okay to tell your users, hey, you have to be on desktop to use this application. So it really depends on website versus web app and where your users will be. But mobile first design is generally saying, if you're going to focus on both of them, do your mobile first, and then it will be easier to get it to look good on desktop as opposed to desktop to mobile.
is it fine to put like technology I work with here, like, or?
Yeah, that's fine.
Because I didn't want to like to be limited there. Oh. All right, perfect.
Cool, good work.
Yeah, I just trying to learn different like things. I worked with, I already tried what is it called, material UI, but it's like a little complex for me right now. I can't really wrap my head around it.
Material UI will be a little bit easier to learn once you get into React. Once you have your head around the components, being able to use them is a little bit easier.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, who wants the last question? Go for it, Shay.
All right. I'm gonna try to word it as I'm currently thinking of the question. So I know as junior developers, we will be working with a team of people. I've worked on a team of people before and as a team leader, but never in the field of developing. So I wanted to know, like, how does like all of that work? Like, say for example, I was a team lead for AT&T, and what my responsibility was making sure that the rest of the team members was doing a part. So we would have somebody, basically the project was comparing the new device to other companies and how we would sell them. So we would have one person compare a certain function or the price of a phone to other competitors and how we can get it priced. And then one person would go through the apps and features to make the phone interesting. And because nobody wanted to present, that was my role. So I had to go and present it to everybody. So we had our different roles in the project and what we contributed. And I was wondering, how would that work as developers? Do one person work on the code like CSS and another person work on HTML while somebody else is doing JavaScript? Like, how does everybody contribute to a project? Like, how does that?
Git is the tool that allows everyone to work on the same code base without stepping on each other. Git is very good about like merging the code down. So if I'm editing the HTML and you're editing the HTML, it will detect what parts we're editing and allow that to merge down together. And then if we're both working on the same parts, that causes what we call a merge conflict. But anyway, that's the technical side of it. Again, this goes back kind of to Palash's question of it depends, right? Some teams are structured of, we've got a couple front-end developers, we've got a couple back-end developers, we've got a couple database developers, we've got a couple DevOps people, and based off of what role they are, we're going to work on something and hand it off, and then they're going to do the next part. On my team, I chose to have all full stack developers, and so we would say, okay, well, what capacity are you at? Right? How many tasks did you commit to this sprint? You may have something that rolled over from last sprint, and because of that, we're not going to give you a new one. We're going to talk about that in the project management. And oftentimes we will have blockers, right? We will say, well, I can't make the database work until this other backend developer makes the API call, and I can't make the API call until the front end developer has the interface designed. And so that's all part of the project management, is identifying, hey, who's not only best suited to take on this work, but also what's the flow look like? Can we get all of this done in a 2-week period? So that is, oh, excuse me, I have the hiccups. That is all important, and that is all team dynamics, but it really does depend on who do you have on your team, what capacity are they at, how experienced are they, right? Because sometimes we say, hey, this is a requirement that came in from the client, this is a major bug, they can't use the software, and while I would love to be able to give it to a junior developer, I have to give it to a senior developer who can get in and get that fixed on. But my compromise to that will often be, well, have the junior developer come in and shadow you. Maybe they can't ask a ton of questions, but at least they can see how that fix gets done. And so the worst answer you can ever get to a question, I think, is it depends. But in that situation, it really does depend. And you could be in a role that is technical project planning, where you're not writing a single line of code, but you're spending 7 hours a day in meetings, and you're facilitating communications between developers and project planners and project stakeholders and designers and third-party vendors, and that role exists too. And you can make good money doing that. Even though it's not writing code directly, it's taking all the different sectors that you have learned, all the different modules, and still applying them.
Yeah, it was just always wondering, because you figure a lot of this I'm still new to, especially going into the realm of coding. So in my mind, before I got into it, it was like, well, if people worked on a project, how would they be able to collaborate without messing the code up for somebody? Like, somebody did this code today and somebody else do a code, like how would they not be able to mess the whole thing up? Like, I always thought there was sections, or are there a time like somebody was doing the CSS and then they're done when they end, but they still got to wait for the HTML person to finish their end so they can apply everything. So it was just something I was wondering.
The answer to that is Git, and I was majorly afraid of Git all summer until someone showed me why we need Git, because someone else was working on the file that I was working on. And I'm like, this is dumb. Just make zip files for backups. And when you're done with your file, just copy and paste it over the other file, and all of that will be fine. And I was really afraid of Git until, one, I found a UI, a user interface that I understood, like GitHub Desktop. And two, someone was like, no, we're not making you use Git just because it's a complicated tool. We're making you use Git because you're working on a code base that other people are working on, and we need to be able to collaborate on that, but we can't do that in real time because that would break our code in an entirely different way if we did it like Google Docs. And as soon as someone explained that to me, I was like, oh, maybe Git is worth learning and understanding. So Nathan will touch on that a little bit in his second DevOps module, but that is something that is kind of one of those things that's better learned on the job, of understanding how people are working on that. And something you can say of, well, I know basic Git and I know how to commit and I know pushing and pulling, but using it in a team environment is something I'm looking to learn and grow with. Tara, hold that thought on tech debt. And Gagan, is it a quick question? Because we are over time.
Yes, so I just had a question. So since I'm I'm building like multiple portfolios, and I hope all of them are on Git now, should I remove some of them or just keep the one I want, or just leave?
You can archive repositories on Git, I believe, which is probably the safer thing to do. But yes, if you have multiple portfolios, I would delete them or archive them so you only have one.
Yeah, I was like maybe just leave them for fun. I was like no, I'm gonna remove them now. Okay.
Tara, I will give you the 30-second answer. The question is, what is tech debt? Tech debt is when you are writing your code and you're like, turns out that there is a better way to do this, but I'm going to intentionally not fix it now so I can move on to other features, knowing that if I have to fix it down the road, that tech debt is going to have interest on it. So it's actually going to be harder to fix later on because I didn't fix it when I noticed the problem. And so oftentimes we fix tech debt by refactoring our code or addressing a problem. So sometimes we find a bug and we go, well, this is such a small bug, or we don't think people are going to run into it. We're not going to fix it now. We're going to move on. But like all debt has interest on it. And so down the road, you may have to go back and fix that bug. But because you haven't worked on that code for a while, it may take you longer to fix it because you have to remember what the bug was, what code was running when it caused that issue, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, we are at time. I will say that all of tonight's session is my favorite one-on-ones to have. I love coding. I love helping you with the code. But if you have questions like you guys have tonight, schedule one-on-ones. Ask me anything. I can easily spend an hour doing. And in fact, Doug does that every month. He uses an hour one-on-one with me to just ask questions. And sometimes they're code related. Sometimes they're just, hey, can you explain this concept? Or can we talk about this framework or whatever it is? I love it when people pick my brain. So don't be afraid to use your one-on-ones for that. I hope to see half of you at Rock on Tech tomorrow. I will post hopefully a summary of how all of that went. But if you are not attending Rock on Tech tomorrow, spend that time on your capstone. Don't view that as a night off. Think about reviewing your JavaScript. Think about what you need to do on your capstone and be ready for Ryan on Monday. He did have pre-reading for you guys. That is up in Canvas. It is optional if you want to read it. It is not super technical, but it is something that you guys can do to prep for him coming in, not on Monday. We are off on Monday for Juneteenth on Tuesday. Otherwise, use your one-on-ones, and I will see you guys all in a couple weeks.